going to talk about the struggle of winning. The struggle of winning. Start you with this. She was 15 years old. She went with her friends to the swimming pool. And they were out swimming, enjoying the water and the sun. All of a sudden, she dove into the pool and she had a freak accident. She hit herself on the head. And when she did, they pulled her out of the swimming pool and they rushed her to the hospital. And upon coming to the hospital, they disrobed her and placed her upon a gurney. And on this gurney, where she was unclothed at the time, but she had a sheet that was covering her. Now, while laying on the gurney at the hospital, the sheet that was covering her when she was unclothed began to slip off. Now, as the sheet begins to slip off, it begins to show her in an uncompromising position. And she so desperately wanted to take the sheet and cover herself up with it. But it found out that she had been paralyzed from the neck down. And because of that, she tried with all that she might to move her arms, her legs, her body, anything, so that that sheet would not fall off her body. That lady was Joni Eareckson Tada. She writes this story in her book called Joni. And she says that when she found out that she was paralyzed, she was unable to move at all, and she found that to be the most devastating thing in her life. Now, as Christians, see, we can understand the agony of wanting to move, as Paul was describing, that this sinful flesh is paralyzed, and it refuses to respond to the law of God. And try as we might, we're trying to lift our hands, move our feet, twist our bodies, but we're unable to get this sinful flesh to move as we would want it to move. We're unable to get it to respond to anything but earthly things that it would like to respond to, and that's what it's aroused by. And Paul concludes that it is a struggle on trying to win. So we could probably understand what Paul is trying to say here. Even though the passage has its complexities and its difficulties, the passage is trying to teach us about what Paul is describing his struggle to win. Now, in this, I'm going to look at two things, and we're going to camp on verses 14 and 15. Now, I'm not going to go into the depths of whether or not this passage is for an unbeliever or a believer, but I'm going to tell you that I believe this passage is pointing towards a believer, not who is immature, but a believer who is very mature in the faith of Christ Jesus. So, and Paul then pens this passage, and we find it very difficult because Paul is talking about this struggle on winning this war. And he's saying it's a struggle, but at times he finds himself paralyzed, unable to move, even though try as he might. He said, I cannot get my flesh to move in the direction that I want it to move. Now the question is, why? So then we've got to understand our struggles. The first one I'm going to tell you is our struggle with power. Now why am I going to tell you that? Because in verse 14, Paul writes that he says, for he knows that the law is spiritual, but he says, I am of the flesh and I'm sold into the bondage of sin. I'm going to tell you that power comes from two places. Paul writes here that the problem is power. And it comes from two places. One, it comes from the spiritual. And Paul says right here in the text that the law of God, he said that thing is good. It's righteous, it's holy. And he's specifically talking about the law of Moses. That which Moses came down from the mountain, written on the tablet, that's what he's specifically talking about. And he's saying that that law is holy, that law is righteous, that law is good, that law is spiritual, and that law has power. But he's also saying that I in myself have a problem with a power called flesh. And this is the second power. And he's saying when it comes to the power of the flesh, he's saying the flesh then wants to move towards those things which it desires and it wants and it pursues those things. And because of that, he says there is a power that is within each and every one of us. and it has a control over us, and it's derived from where? The earth. Okay, well, let me explain. See, well, you have to understand, when we go back to the time of Adam, how was Adam created? The Bible tells us that Adam was created from the earth. He says that's how Adam was created. And when Adam was created, he says, what did God do? God then breathed what? The nuah, or the spirit, or the ruah, or the spirit of God into Adam, and then he became a living being. That's what the Bible teaches. So then Paul comes here and he begins to tell us, he said, I've got a problem. And the problem is, I've got earthly desires. And where did the earthly desires come from? The fact that I was created at the same time like Adam, which is from the earth. And because I am created from the earth, I have these what are called earthly desires. And he said that in itself is the problem, because God has blown in each one of us. When we become new in Christ, the ruah, or the Spirit of God, indwells each and every one of us. So then there's the two powers. See, if we go back to the time of Adam, then we can understand that we ourselves have something earthly within us, and that earthly part of us wants to connect to earthly desires and earthly things, because that's the earthly part of us. So when Paul was talking here, it wasn't simply just talking flesh in itself, but he was talking about those things which are earthly, i.e. you and I, because we were created that way from the beginning of time. And so Paul is saying, what I have is these earthly power that is controlling me on one end, and I have the power of the Spirit on the other end. But when I use and try to utilize the power of the Spirit, it seems to have no effect when it comes to those earthly desires that I have. Can you understand that? See, when we have to take a look at that, then you and I can understand that. So what happens is, it creates an addiction. See, an addiction is when you and I have a desire for things that you and I want to have, obtain, or pursue. That's an addiction. And so what it is the power then creates an addiction over the earthly part of us that desires those earthly things. So our desire then for the earthly, fleshly things that we want to pursue is greater than the desire to know the Spirit and the law of God. So then Paul comes back and he says, look, there's these two powers working. And one of them has an addiction and a control upon your life. And he said, because of that, Paul said, it's not a problem of knowledge. I got knowledge. He's mature in the faith. Paul says, I got understanding. I have that too. And he says, as a matter of fact, Paul writes in the text, he says, I've got a desire to know God. I got that desire. You and I can say the same thing. We have a desire to know God. And he says, but the problem is, even with my desire to know God, my desire to connect to those things of the earth, and those earthly, fleshly type things, it seems to be winning in the desire over my desire for the law. And he says, and because it does, when I'm sitting there wanting to do what God would have me to do, I don't have the power to move. I don't have the power to raise my limbs. I don't have the power to walk into the house of God. I don't have the power to do those things that I desire so much to do with God. Because I end up finding myself, the fleshly part of me, the earthly part of me, wanting to connect with these earthly desires and things. And so that wins, he said, most every time. He said it becomes an addiction. And so he says this power then, it reigns over us, according to Paul. Paul is saying that this power has a greater power over us because it is more addicting. So then can you then overcome an addiction? That's going to be the question then. Because you're going to say there's some things within us, and if we were to be frank and honest, there are some things that this earthly vessel is connected to that it likes. That's the power. And as try as you might, that thing may have been on you for 20 years now. And you're going, it's been there 20 years. That's right, 20 years. And you try and try So you really could relate to the text. Because you tried everything. You did double prayers. You did spins. You did all of that. And none of that worked because you were saying, I have this desire to know God better. You find yourself invested in the church more, and you still find this addiction that is still going on within the flesh. How does that work? See, if we were to be honest with ourselves, that thing is still there. And Paul is writing from the perspective of a mature Christian. This is what makes it so great. Is because Paul is then mature in the faith, but he's looking back and saying, this is my life. This is how I've been living, and this is how it's been working on me. So then you've got to say, okay, then how can you overcome this power of addiction? Well, let me tell you something about addiction. One is that there are inbred. Oh, you're not going to like this. It's inbred. That means it comes from within and manifests itself outward. The addiction is not outward. The addiction is inward. So it's inbred, and then it moves outward. And then it finds that it becomes dormant in the life of the believer at certain points because it hasn't been released yet. But the thing is, it never leaves. An addiction never leaves. It stays right there with you forever. And so if that's the case, that it's inbred, that it stays within you forever and it never leaves, then you're going to have to find a way to deal with this thing, because an addiction only expands for the purpose to destroy you. Oh, this is true. It's true. It's true. Because when you think about that thing in your life, which is tied to the earth, it will take the opportunity, if it could, expand so much into your life that would destroy your entire being. That's the purpose. That thing is inbred. That thing you're going to have to deal with for the rest of your life. It's not going to just walk away. It's not going to just disappear. It's not going to just, you raise your hand and it's gone. It doesn't work that way. So then Paul was saying, listen, I've got this problem. And he was saying, listen, I've got to learn how to deal with this problem. So then you got to find a way of coping with them, because this problem that you have, guess what? It will be transferred. This is why you see it in your children. I don't care how hard you try to hide it and keep it from them. What you have is going to be transferred to them. It bothers you. You say, no, it can't be. Oh yeah. Because sin is transferred. See, it goes from one to the next. And if you see, that's why you'll say, my kids, they act just like you, right? They act just like you. Why do they act like you? They took your tendencies, your traits. They even took some of your inbred addiction, and it's been transferred to them. Whether we like it or not. And it may not manifest itself because it may be dormant. And it hasn't had the opportunity to arouse. But it's there. And you probably have the same addiction your parents had. And you got it. The same one they had has been transferred down to you. And so with these addictions that we have, which would have power over the earthly side of us, which Paul would say is the fleshly side, even though we want to be spiritual, even though he says, I desire to be spiritual as much as possible, Paul says that this power still looms. And it's still sitting there. So then you've got to learn how to do a coping mechanism with this thing. You've got to learn how to cope with it and deal with it and find out, hey, how will I be able to navigate life's courses in life with this addiction and this power that has been overriding me and overlaying me that Paul is talking about, in which my earthly side of me is attached to? Well, you can do community. When we come together in community and have accountability, that will help you to be able to cope with your addiction that you have Let me say, I go to conferences a lot. And when I do, there's a lot of group of pastors that I know that I will typically meet at those conferences. And sometimes we'll be a night away or something like that at the conference. But you know, one of the things we always do, I'm going to tell you, there's a group maybe from 5 or 10 of us that I know really well. We'll end up staying up late at night. And we'll be sitting at an IHOP or a Whataburger, something like that. 1, 2 in the morning. Sometimes even just talking. Why are we doing that? And it dawned on me, I know why we're doing it. We want to hold each other accountable. We want to stay in community. We know if left alone to our own devices, see, when you're mature enough, you know when left alone to your own earthly addiction and device, you can't handle it. You can't deal with it. It's hard. And so instead of putting ourselves through it, we hang around each other. We sit there with each other, talking and collaborating and things like that, because you've got to know you. You got to know what it is that makes you tick, what it is that your earthly desire is attached to and will move toward. See, it's not necessarily a character. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that there's a character flaw in you or anything like that. It just means that your earthly side has an addiction in which it desires so much of. And Paul says the reason being is because you've been handed over and you've placed under sin. That's what he says in the text. We're under bondage to sin. He said you've been handed over and placed under this bondage of sin. He said there's not much you can do about that because you've been given away to be under the bondage of sin. And so Paul says, since I've been done that way, you then can combat this. I'm going to tell you how. One simple, I'm going to tell you how to do it. Confession. Confession. You're going to say, well, I do. I go and say, I confess, God, forgive me of my sin. No, I ain't talking about that. I'm talking about a confession that says, God, forgive me of this thing right here. That confession. People won't do that. They want to keep it general. You know why you want to keep it general? Because there's certain things we like. We ain't going to confess that we have this specific problem. See, that's getting specific. And you tell God specifically what that problem is. See, that's how that problem will then start to no longer have the power over you. And I know you don't want to just continue to limp through life like this, barely making it. That's not how you want to live your life. You want to live your life free from the bondage of sin. So then how are you confess to God, this is my problem, God. And you know it better than me. And you know it yourself. But we give God this surface level, hey, just forgive me my sin. What is that? God already knows, but he wants you to tell him. And that's where we will hold back. And that will help release this power that you're having over your life that is over that addicting part of you. So then Paul says we have this struggle of trying to win because we have a problem with this struggle with power. Of the two powerful forces that are coming together. But listen also, there's a struggle with performance. You know, I used to have to, in corporate America, they would give performance reviews. I don't know if you guys ever had a performance review. You guys have? Okay. Well, you know when they would sit you down and they want to find out whether or not you meet up to all of the things that they laid out for you. Things you need to accomplish and things like that. And you know, I hated those things. Because I'll be trying to figure out, let me see, make sure I complete everything. Did I do all my objectives and goals? I want to make sure I got there so I would get a high rating on the performance review. And see, all of us can relate to a performance review. Paul then comes back and says there's a struggle with performance. Paul found that he failed in the performance review. He says where I failed is trying to, as standard, hold up to the objective that the law would have for me. I failed. He says, but what I found myself passing on is on the performance of the earth and the world in my flesh. He says, it seems like I found myself to be an actor on stage. And I was carrying out the performance that I would want to do on the earthly side. And that performance I would put out in front of everyone. And everyone would see how well I've done. And this was that they would see that was the flesh or the earthly side of me practicing. Those desires, those are the things I would practice instead of those things of the law. So when it came to performing for the law, he says, I fell short. But when it came to performing for the earth and the world, he said, I surpassed everybody. He says, my performance was out of the park. I did a fantastic job. And then Paul says, what I found, it was very difficult for me to be able to understand what I was going on, because I desired to perform well for God. That was my desire. But I found myself performing even better on the stage of the earthly life. That's where I found myself doing all of my performances. He says, that's where I ended up landing, because I am tethered to the earth and its desires. And because I'm tethered to it, he says, this is the stage I find myself on. The stage of the earth, doing out all of my performance. And guess what? When people see me, he says, they look at me, but he says, overall, I despised it. Paul says that performance was the worst one. He says, matter of fact, it was the one I despised the most. He comes back and says, I found myself despising that performance at all, because people began to relate me to that experience. You got to know, what's that actor, Danny Glover? You know he was in the movie The Color Purple? You guys may have seen him in that movie. He was Mr. in The Color Purple. As a matter of fact, he was Whoopi Goldberg's husband. Celie, right? Celie, yeah. That was her. Now, you guys remember how evil Danny was. And he would beat Whoopi Goldberg. He would abuse her. People thought he was so disgusting, and the way he treated her. And you know, Danny Glover, that was one of his best performances. It was one of his best. And he would tell you, man, this is one of my best performances, that I got to be Mr. in The Color Purple, the husband of Whoopi Goldberg. But he goes on and he says it's one of his most despised performances. One that he hates the most. And I'm reading, Danny, you got all these accolades for this performance of Mr. on The Color Purple. But at the same time, Danny, you're saying you despise the performance. Why? Oh, Danny goes and says that when he would go around the world and people would meet him and stuff, they would cuss at him. They would be angry with him. They would call him names because they thought he was just like the performer, the actor in the play. And because they thought this is his character, this is who he is, this is how he behaves in real life, they were unable to separate the actor of performance from that which was his real life. And so he concluded that he despised the performance altogether, because it had shown him that he figured in the wrong light. We're actors. When we act out our fleshly side, our earthly side, see, people see that. And a lot of times, they'll equate you to that. They'll say, that's all you're about. Paul says, that's the side I don't want to perform on. I don't want people to see me that way. He says, I want to perform for God. He says, so I end up despising my performance that I do here on earth. Because when people see it, they equate me to it and say, that's who you are. But no, it was the earthly addiction, which has the power, which creates the performance that you see. That's not always me. And so we have to be careful when we look at others and we see their performance. Then we're ready to assess them in a way that says, that's you. That's who you are, because you behaved in such a way. We have to be careful, because we may have caught them in a performance. We may have caught them in an addiction. We may have caught them in a time in which there was this struggle. And it may not be who they are. Because when it comes down to it, you and I should be able to simply, no. We should empathize with them. And the reason you and I should be able to empathize with them is because you and I have the same problem. See, all of us have a scar. From childhood, I bet you could show it. You probably have one you remember, this happened, or you could probably name it. And so with our scar, we should come down and sit down with them. Empathy is different than sympathy. See, sympathy, we'll say, I don't know why you do that. I don't have that problem. You should be overcome it. It should be easy. Just, what's the problem? That's sympathy. But empathy says, I have a scar too. Matter of fact, let me sit down with you. Let me tell you about my scar. You know, here's was my addiction. Here's where it had a power over me. That's empathy. That's when you're sitting down across from him and saying, let me tell you what's wrong with me too. I know you struggle. I struggle too. But that's what we do. Paul said this is what we do. So yeah, I'm not going to judge you from your act that we found you in. I'm not going to say that's who you are and be done with you. You know what? Because you didn't catch me in my worst act. You caught me in a better act. So we should be able to really empathize with him. Say, I totally understand. Because I'm there. That's empathy. See, that's what we should be doing. Because we all have this thing to deal with. None of us are separated from it. Paul says this is the problem that we have in our flesh. And then what is God doing in this process? In this process, God is slowly cleaning us up. See, when God saves you, it doesn't mean you're going to be sinless. No, it doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is that as you grow in God, you will sin less than before. Doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. Doesn't mean that. It just means you're going to sin less than before. And as you sin less, see, that's God cleaning you up. Because you got to remember, you can't sanctify yourself. You can't make yourself better. Because the Bible tells us it is God who calls. God who justifies. God is the one that sanctifies. God is the one that cleans us up. He does that. You know, my wife cooked and burnt some food and I had to clean it up. I mean, I burnt that food. Let me get that straight now. She didn't burn that food. I burnt that food. Because I love everything she cooked. I want to keep cooking for me. So I love everything. I eat it all. Doesn't matter. But let me tell you, when something burnt, I don't know if you ever had pots or pans that food gets burnt in. And you may do like me. I mean, things my mama taught me. My mama said, hey, you know, go in there and wash that pot, and if it was burnt, you know what she made me? She made me soak it in water. Just sit there and sit down in water. I'd soak it in water, and then you come back, pour it out, and some of the grime was off of it. Not all of it, but some of it. Then she made me wash it. I had to wash it with the scrubber. You know, one of them scrubber, maybe an SOS pad or something like that. I wash it like that. Some of the grime would come off again. Some more. Then maybe I'd take a knife and scrape that thing. You guys ain't ever had to do that. Yeah, see, y'all got it nice, but I had to scrape it with the knife or a spoon. Mama made me scrape it. Then some more stuff would come off. Throw it away. And as more stuff would come off, then Mama say, keep washing. She made me get a rag. I would wash it some more till some more stuff come off. And finally, everything in that pot was clean. See, that's how God does. See, everything don't come off you at once. God soaks you. Some of it comes off. And then he washes you. A little more comes off. He scrubs on you. A little more comes off. And it's God who does that, not you of yourself. It is God who's doing that thing. And so each one of us, God does differently. Some are faster, some are slower. This is why we should empathize with them as they go through their struggles on trying to win in this life. Because of this. This is why we should do those type of things. Life is hard. And it's a struggle to win. Paul says there's a struggle with this power. There's a struggle with this performance. He says those are the things that we have to deal with in order to be able to win. You know, there was this guy, Bill Broadus. Bill Broadus. He was running in a race in Omaha, Nebraska. And he wanted to run the race. It was a 10K. It's about 6 miles. The problem is that he had a brain aneurysm. Now with the brain aneurysm, he had to cause himself to be paralyzed on one side. And because of that, he had to run just a little bit differently than everybody else, as you could imagine. But he wanted to run the race. There was a guy that was in the race named Bill Rogers. He was a runner. And Broadus looked up to him. He thought he was one of the best runners there were. So they were lining up at the race. And of course, Rogers, this famous runner, he takes off and he wins the race in less than 20-something minutes. Other people came and ran the race. It took them 30 to 50 minutes. It took some 60 to 70 minutes, about an hour. But here goes Broadus. Remember, he has this brain aneurysm. Remember, he's paralyzed. And he's running the race, and it's 6 miles. And most time you can run 6 miles, an hour or so, walk it in that time. But he was still having trouble. And he says, as he was going through the race, he said his whole body, left side, began to hurt, that he was paralyzed. And he said he was still trying to limp and carry himself through. He said it was pain was unbearable, but he wanted to run the race. Matter of fact, he wanted to finish the race, and he had the hopes of actually trying to win the race. Can you believe that? This man with an aneurysm, paralyzed on one side, stands at the beginning of the race with this idea that he could win. An idea that he would finish this race. He was still running 2 hours into the event. They closed it down. And here, Broadus still trying to limp to the finish line of this race. He said he was crying. He wanted to give up. He was saying, what's the point in continuing forward? Why even go on? Why don't I just quit? He said, matter of fact, I was going along and police officers would have to stop traffic because the race was shut down. He said, a lady would help and give me water. And he was going, I still haven't finished it. 4 hours in and he still hasn't finished the race. He said he finally get to where he could see the finish line. He says, I know that's where it is. And he's limping along, paralyzed on one side, but determined to finish this race. As he goes along, he sees it and he gets there and he says the banner was taken down. He said all the people had gone home. He said it was nobody but him and the finish line. He said as he got closer to cross that line, he said the moment he did, he said what happened was his idol, Bill Rumagers, who won the race. He comes out of the alleyway. And this gang of people come with him. And then they embraced him, they hugged him, and they said, this medal is for the one who finished last. Because actually, we knew they're the winner of the race. They expected him to finish. They expected him to be there. And they told him, you're the real winner. Because you finished this even though you were paralyzed, even though you were in pain, even though you felt all of those hurts, you decided not to quit. And see, what I'm telling you is that, yes, you're going to struggle in life. Yes, you're going to have them. But what I'm telling you is life is tough. And you're going to find yourself limping along at times, paralyzed and hurting, and you're going to want to quit. You're going to want to stop. And you're going to want to say, what's the point in going on any further? But God has a reward for you. Has a reward for anybody who crosses the line. Doesn't mean you can't cross it limping. Doesn't mean you can't cross it half paralyzed. But you got to get to the finish line. That's where you got to go. Yes, it's a struggle to win. Yes, it's a struggle with power. Yes, it's a struggle with your performance. Yes, but limp on anyway. Hallelujah. Limp on anyway. And keep going for God. And if you believe that, say amen.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the sermon and encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. There, you will receive even more encouraging words from Pastor Tim. Remember, in addition to the videos, with a simple registration, you can receive the life notes. Pastor's outline and scripture references for his sermons will come directly to your inbox each week. Thank you again for watching. You are always invited to attend our morning worship services every Sunday morning starting at 10 a.m. Bible studies are Wednesday evenings starting at 6:30. You've been listening to Pastor Timothy Jones of Rockbridge Church, Allen, Texas, where we follow the Go MC mission: God, others, ministry, and community.